All right, hey, I've been working on something here the past couple weeks, and I think this may be the perfect time to start it. I wanted to work on some impressions. I figured it's something I could use from time to time, get a laugh here or there, really bring something else to the show. So I want to start it off right here. This one is what I would call much needed fantasy stud. Are you ready? Here we go. All right. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you guys are all doing well out there. Welcome to Week 13 Fantasy Football, where today we're talking about running backs, and we're going to be going through all of the matchups here in Week 13. No more bye weeks. Thank you, Lord. It's about time we get our full roster back, make a strong push into the playoffs, and win some fantasy championships. Now, we're going to go over our Week 12 numbers here in just 1 second, but before we do, one more reminder, just because there's people out there that do not listen to this, so I feel like I have to say it every time. Do not get caught up with what column these guys are sitting in for me. Your situation may be different. Maybe you have players injured, whatever it may be, depending on who your opponent has going for them. So many things can really change your team and what you need to put into your lineup. So take the information that is provided and use it to make your decisions on Sunday. This is not a place for you to come just point a finger if it doesn't work out. They're your teams. Look at it this way. If you're in a league and you win money, are you going to give us some of that money because we gave advice? No, you're not. So don't get pissed off when we're not 100% correct. Nobody's going to be 100% correct. Take this information, make the best possible case scenario that you can with your roster, and try to get some wins. That's what it's all about, and that's what we're talking about today. So before we get into Week 13, let's see how we did in Week 12. One of our best weeks of the season for the running back position there in Week 12. We had a total of 47 players that we gave a start or sit designation to. Out of those 47, 33 were correct, for an accuracy percentage of 70% in Week 12. A few of our big hits: Mark Ingram balled out for the Baltimore Ravens. Latavius Murray had him as a start last week and actually performed in that double-digit cutoff. He was a hit. Devin Singletary, he got to a 100-yard game. Saquon Barkley told people to sit him last week. Most people probably ignored it, which I understand, but he didn't perform once again. And same with David Montgomery. Had a great matchup, still didn't perform, had him as a sit. That's another hit for us. Misses, some of our big misses. Ronald Jones. Yep, missed on Ronald Jones, but you know what? I can live with this one because this is not the time of year that you need to rely on Ronald Jones. Next up, Jamal Williams, Green Bay Packers. He is actually a little bit more involved than Aaron Jones this past week. He was a miss. Darius Geis. Expected a lot more out of Darius Geis. Earlier in the week, they were talking about some turf toe for Adrian Peterson. Didn't really hold him back much. That's a pretty much 50-50 split in Washington. James White for the New England Patriots. He was non-existent in that horrible weather game. They just relied a little bit more on the running game. Jalen Samuels expected a lot more work in the passing game. This past week, he did not get it. It was all Benny Snell. So those were a few of our biggest misses there for Week 12. But now we're heading into Week 13. This is critical, right? We don't want to get too cute in Week 13. We need some solid starts this week. We're not going to go absolutely crazy. There are a few names that I do not like, a few big names that I do not like this week, and we're going to talk about it here. But once again, take this information, apply it to your league, and let's go get ourselves a couple wins this week. Here we go, diving into Week 13. All right, Thanksgiving Thursday. So as you guys are all enjoying your family turkey stuffing, whatever else you're stuffing your face with, we got some football to talk about and watch. First game up, Bears and Lions, and is it just me, or is everybody sick of David Montgomery? I mean, the guy is just, at this point, too hard to trust. It's his third straight game this past week with only 6 fantasy points or less. He hasn't had less than 13 carries in a game since Week 8, so that's a positive thing. The problem is he's only averaging 3 yards per carry. He's only had 3 receptions over his last 3 games combined, so he's not overly involved in the passing game. Now, is this a great matchup? He's going up against the Detroit Lions, who as of right now, for the season, give up on average over 26 fantasy points per game. But as of late, they've been playing a lot better. There's only been one running back with more than 64 yards rushing against them in the last 5 weeks. It was Josh Jacobs just a few weeks ago. They actually held Zeke in check just a couple weeks ago to only 45 yards rushing. Can David Montgomery go off? Yes, he can. Is this the time of the year that I trust David Montgomery to win me a fantasy week? No, it's just not. I'm going to have to pass on him. I just can't trust him at this point. Now, Tariq Cohen, he's more of a full-point PPR option. If you're in a deeper league, larger than 12 teams, Tariq Cohen becomes somebody that comes into play as a possible flex play. Full-point PPR, just not consistent enough, doesn't have a high enough ceiling on a week-to-week basis to trust here either. So what about for the Detroit Lions? We got Bo Scarborough, right? Bo knows. He may not be needed anymore. A lot of teams probably picked him up off the waiver wire, used him here for the bye weeks, but he's somebody who's going to get decent volume. I mean, just last week had 18 carries, 98 yards. He had a costly fumble, though, that kind of, derailed his fantasy day somewhat, kind of left a bad taste in the mouth of a few fantasy owners. You hating to lose those couple of points because at this point in the season, those 2 points are very costly. So Chicago only allows right now 20 fantasy points per game on the ground to running backs. He is a solid flex play. Doesn't really have much PPR upside. So if you're in a PPR league, he does lose some value. But if you're hurting for a flex spot and you're looking for somebody that's going to touch the ball between 15 and 18 times a game, Bo Scarborough this week is not a horrible play. He should get the goal line touches, and he's definitely somebody who has a safe floor. Ceiling, somewhat limited, though, on a weekly basis. Next game up on Thanksgiving Day is going to be the Buffalo Bills Dallas Cowboys. Now, Zeke pretty much rebounded this past week after a pretty bad Week 11 against the Detroit Lions, like we just talked about, where he only had 16 carries, 45 yards. This past week, though, in Week 12, 126 total yards against the New England Patriots in what was a very disgusting weather game. Now, yeah, those are the games that are pretty much dominated more on the ground, but it was great once again to see Zeke be productive against a solid defense. Now, right now, Dallas is in need of a win against a playoff contender. A lot of people on the hot seat, and the Buffalo Bills are no pushover. Right now, they allow just over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So, of course, you're going to play Ezekiel Elliott once again this week. For Buffalo, it's Devin Singletary who we're going to be talking about. He's really the guy here in this backfield now. He's averaging almost 6 yards per carry. He had 21 carries last week, which he turned into 106 yards. Great game last week. Good to see the volume there going towards Devin Singletary. I mean, it's a lot easier to run on Dallas right now than it is to throw on them, and Buffalo runs the ball right around 30 times a game. Singletary remains a running back that I will start this week as a solid flex play. Now, we saw Frank Gore go out there and pass Barry Sanders on the all-time rushing list. Is that something that he was just trying to accomplish? Is he really going to be pushed out there for more volume here down the stretch? Possible to somewhat keep Devin Singletary healthy, but his ceiling is pretty capped at this point. He's kind of just out there at times, and unless he breaks off a big run, which we don't see very often from Frank Gore, we're probably not going to need him in our fantasy lineups going forward. Devin Singletary, like I said, getting those 20 carries, big number, and he's definitely somebody you can throw in your flex play if you're looking for a spot here in Week 13. Last game up on Thanksgiving Day is going to be the New Orleans Saints and Atlanta Falcons. Now, for Alvin Kamara, he's an obvious must-start every single week, despite having some smaller numbers than a lot of his owners were really hoping for at this point of the season. I mean, he's had no touchdowns since Week 3. But the receiving volume is still there. Over his last 3 games, he is averaging 99 total yards, 10 targets, and 9 receptions a game. Atlanta right now allowing 20.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. However, over their last 3 games, they're only allowing 12.6 fantasy points per game. We've been talking about that defense, how they've been playing better over the past few weeks, and you can tell it right there in the numbers. Now, those are not just some crappy running backs that they're holding down either. Those last 3 games where they've really improved those numbers were against Todd Gurley, Chris Carson, and a game against Alvin Kamara just a couple weeks ago. So I'll start Kamara this week, but I'm not risking it with Latavius Murray. Like I said, this defense playing a little bit better. Murray doesn't see enough consistent volume or involvement in the passing game to give him that safe floor, so not risking it with him this week. However, for Atlanta, does Devonta Freeman return this week? He's back at practice. There's a chance that he returns. Does he split carries with Brian Hill, though? That's the problem. Regardless, this is a very, very tough matchup. The New Orleans Saints right now are the 3rd best team in the NFL with giving up fantasy points to opposing running backs at only 14.2 per game. If Devonta Freeman comes back, I highly doubt he comes back into a full workload. I can see more of a split here the next couple weeks if he returns. They're not playing for anything really in Atlanta. Why rush him out there, give him 20 carries, have him re-aggravate something, and not have him for the rest of the year, and it's just another injury he has to rehab in the offseason. I expect them to work him in slowly, and that split with Brian Hill going up against a difficult defense is not something that I'm willing to tempt here in Week 13. I'm going to pass on both of these guys. Moving on to Sunday now, we got the Tennessee Titans, Indianapolis Colts, and at this point, Derrick Henry is about as must-start as you can possibly get. Over his last 3 games, he has a total of 55 carries, 410 yards rushing, and 6 touchdowns in 3 games. He's all the way up to running back 4 overall right now in half-point PPR scoring, and he remains one of our best preseason calls. We love Derrick Henry in the preseason, and he's really coming through with some huge numbers. Now, the Colts, somewhat of a tough matchup, though. They're only allowing 15.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, one of the top run defenses here in the Indianapolis Colts. But this is just a guy that you can't afford to sit. He's somewhat matchup proof. The volume is going to be there. Not overly involved in the passing game. That's a concern, but the touchdown upside on the weekly basis is just something you cannot shy away from. Derrick Henry, obvious must start. Now, for the Colts, it seems to be the Jonathan Williams backfield until Marlon Mack returns, whenever that is. He's had back-to-back 100-yard games, and Tennessee just allowed Leonard Fournette to run absolutely crazy all over them. Jacksonville allows 26.5 fantasy points per game on the ground to opposing running backs. He's not quite a must-start, is Jonathan Williams, but he's definitely somebody that, even though you're not dealing with bye weeks right now, is somebody who has solid volume, that if you're looking for a flex play, maybe you're in a league with multiple flex spots, Jonathan Williams has that upside here this week. Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins, neither one of these guys sees enough volume consistently to trust at this point of the season. Jonathan Williams, it's his backfield for right now. He's the one getting all the volume, and he's also showing that he has that touchdown upside. Also, he's a guy that I would throw in my flex spot if needed here this week. Moving on to the Jets and the Bengals now, and Le'Veon Bell continues to be a solid low-end running back 1. Right now, he is currently running back 12 overall. We said all throughout the preseason here to avoid him on draft day, buy him later in the year, that his schedule was just horrendous to start the season. So far here in the second half of the season, he's had 4 straight games with at least 13 fantasy points and half-point PPR scoring. That's a number that he only saw twice the whole first 8 weeks of the season, so he's definitely been better here second half. Not huge Le'Veon Bell numbers, but a lot more improved. Low-end running back 1 that you could have gotten at a discounted price there on draft day. Now, right now, Cincinnati, the Bengals, they allow 22 fantasy points per game, 6th most in the NFL. And just last week, Benny Snell, who looks like he's running with cinder blocks on his feet, had 98 yards rushing against them. We're starting Le'Veon Bell here, obviously, once again. Now, for Cincinnati, 0 targets for Joe Mixon in Week 12. 0? Like, as in none? I mean, I know he wasn't getting a whole lot of volume in the passing game, but none? I mean, he'd had at least 1 target every single game this season, and all of a sudden Zach Taylor just said, F it, we're not doing it no more. I mean, what's going on there? I mean, this offense is bad enough as is. He's not getting enough work in the passing game as he probably should be. This is definitely a running back that needs to be getting, on average, about 5 targets a game. He's very dynamic once he gets the ball in his hands. He can make defenders miss and break big plays at times. He's just not getting that opportunity consistently enough. Now, Andy Dalton will be back under center. Can that help? Well, it can't hurt, right? I mean, he's only got nowhere else to go but up. I mean, hopefully they involve him a little bit more. Maybe Andy Dalton can move the ball down the field more consistently, and that could open up some running lanes for Joe Mixon. The Jets only allow those 16 fantasy points per game, which is a top 10 defense there as far as opposing running backs in fantasy point scoring goes. Mixon, he's still a very mid to low end running back 2 this week. He's a start, but he's a start with some risk. Redskins and Panthers up now, and how good has Christian McCaffrey really been this year? I mean, let's just take a look at the numbers just for a quick second, because obviously you're starting him. Right now, he already has over 300 total fantasy points. He has 69 points more than the next closest running back, which is Dalvin Cook, who's absolutely killing it this season also. McCaffrey also has 16 touchdowns in 11 games, and now he gets the defense of the Washington Redskins, who give up over 20 fantasy points per game. It's going to be another good one for Christian McCaffrey. He's a definite must start. But what about on the Washington Redskins type of things? I mean, the worst word that you can possibly use in a fantasy backfield is the word timeshare. One word or two words. Whatever it is, timeshare here in Washington is not going to be a good thing. It's basically a 50-50 split between Darius Geis and Adrian Peterson, but this is such a great matchup. The Carolina Panthers give up, on average, over 24 fantasy points per game, third most in the NFL, but who gets the touches here? Who gets the goal line carries? Is it Peterson? Is it Geis? Geis more dynamic, Peterson more consistent. I mean, what do we do in this backfield? As much as I really want to start one of these guys, just due to the matchup alone, there's a lot of risk with either one of them. Their ceilings are pretty high, but their floors are really low. It's kind of something that you're just going to have to gamble on if needed. I would prefer to avoid both if possible. I am a Geis believer. Maybe not a 2019 Geis believer, but if he can come into 2020 healthy, he's definitely a back that we're going to take a good look at there closely because he could have some huge sleeper value in 2020. 49ers and Ravens up next, and this could very easily be the game of the week here for Week 13. Now, I'm definitely starting Mark Ingram. Whoop, whoop. I mean, the guy is totally playing out of his mind football here this entire season for the most part. I mean, he's coming off his fourth 100-yard rushing game. He's had 5 touchdowns in the last 3 games combined, and as of right now, is currently running back 9 in half-point PPR scoring. I mean, heck, if only there was somebody who in the preseason was telling you guys that he was a must-have running back. All right, time to reveal who is the magical running back hiding behind the ginormous question mark that is a must-have running back here for 2019 fantasy football. It's none other than Mr. Mark Ingram of now the Baltimore Ravens, and I really don't get it. I mean, why is nobody on the bandwagon really for Mark Ingram? But don't get me wrong, though. This matchup is pretty tough going up against the San Francisco 49ers, who only allow 12.6 fantasy points per game. But don't forget, Mark Ingram just faced a pretty tough run defense just a few weeks ago in the New England Patriots. And how did he fare against them in Week 9? He put up 144 total yards. I'm not sitting Mark Ingram. I'm not sitting this offense of the Baltimore Ravens with Lamar Jackson under center. They can move the ball down the field, on the ground, on anybody. Love Mark Ingram again here this week. But the once dominant run game of the San Francisco 49ers has kind of dwindled as of late. I mean, none of these guys are just weekly must-starts anymore. I mean, does Matt Breida return? I think a healthy Matt Breida is the best option in this backfield, but now they're going up against Baltimore, who's a very confident defense right now. They're playing great. In fact, over their last 5 games, they're only allowing, on average, 10 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's better than the San Francisco 49ers. The defense is playing great. Very tough matchup. Does Matt Breida come back? If he does he split carries with Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman? Tevin Coleman has, he's underwhelmed a lot of the season. Raheem Mostert has looked better at times. Is this going to be a 3-headed monster against a very difficult defense? If it is, it makes it kind of hard to start any of these guys. I would prefer to sit all 3 of them. If Matt Breida is 100% healthy, full practice participant by the end of the week, he's somebody that I may gamble on. But outside of that, it's a lot of risk for me here in Week 13. Bucks and Jags up next, and finally Leonard Fournette returned to the end zone last week. Had himself a huge Week 12. How big was it? 24 carries for 97 yards, 9 receptions for 62, 2 total touchdowns, and he is now all the way up to running back 7 in half-point PPR formats. Since Nick Foles has returned, Leonard Fournette has seen 19 targets, had 16 receptions just in the last 2 games combined. Difficult matchup, yes. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers only allow 13.8 fantasy points per game, 4th best in the NFL. But with this type of passing volume, pass game production, Leonard Fournette continues to have a very safe floor. Especially where, we're talking about averaging just over the past couple games 8 receptions a game. That is just, money in the bank for Leonard Fournette, starting him here once again despite the difficult matchup. But what about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? You got Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber. Now, Ronald Jones had a decent Week 12, right? 67 total yards, had a touchdown, and Jacksonville is a pretty decent matchup. Look what Derrick Henry did to this defense last week. They're giving up on average 22 fantasy points per game, 7th most in the NFL. But let me just ask you a question, and you may be able to answer yourself in what column you want to put these guys in. It's Week 13. this may be a must-win game for you. And if it is, do you trust Ronald Jones or Peyton Barber? More than likely, 99.9% of you out there probably just answered no. If that's the case, he's not safe enough for me either. They're both in the sit column. Browns and Steelers up now, and another week has gone by, and another week in which Nick Chubb had 20-plus touches on the ground. Now, he just faced this same Pittsburgh defense just 2 weeks ago. He ended up with 27 carries for 92 yards. Solid game, nothing flashy. In fact, it was the only game all year in half-point PPR formats that he did not get into double digits. This is a pretty solid run defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, only giving up on average 14.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But here in Week 13, what have we been talking about? We're looking for that safety, that consistency, those players we know that are going to go out there and not only, get the volume, but have that touchdown upside on a weekly basis. That's Nick Chubb. He's going to remain in the starting lineup here once again. Kareem Hunt, if you play in a 12-team league or larger, looking for a PPR flex play, Kareem Hunt still a solid option. He has had 15 receptions over his last 3 games, but he's not seen a whole lot of volume on the ground. Kind of limits his ceiling just a little bit from week to week. He's still, like I said, is a solid play, a safer play, not somebody that can maybe go out there and win you your matchup, but plug a hole if you have one there in your flex spot. But what about the Pittsburgh Steelers? Sounds like we may be without James Conner again. Jalen Samuels has basically lost a lot of work to Benny Snell, who may quite possibly be the slowest running back in all of the NFL right now. And Cleveland only allows 17.6 fantasy points per game. But what do we do with the Pittsburgh running backs? What about the quarterback situation here? I mean, Mason Rudolph not there. It's going to be Duck Hodges, Devlin Hodges. They're under center. Is there a chance that maybe Cleveland tries to just take away the running game and force Devlin Hodges to beat them down the field? It's a possibility. It's something to think about. I don't think any of these guys are slam dunks. I do think Jalen Samuels will be still involved a little bit, maybe not as much as he should be, but Benny Snell getting the bulk of that volume is going to be very, very touchdown dependent. So unless you're desperate for a flex play, I'm not touching anybody here for Pittsburgh either. Packers and Giants up now, and this is a perfect time for an Aaron Jones bounce back game. He struggled last week against the San Francisco 49ers, 13 carries for only 38 yards, but now he gets a matchup going up against the New York Giants, who allow, on average, 18.7 fantasy points per game. A good matchup that him and Jamal Williams will both have value in. I can see the Packers getting a lead in this game and relying a lot more on the run second half. It may be garbage points, but they all count just the same. I'll take garbage points all day long. Love Aaron Jones in a bounce-back game this week, and I do think that Jamal Williams sees enough receiving volume in the passing game to kind of give him that safe flex play on a weekly basis. He doesn't have the ceiling of an Aaron Jones, but he does have that safety in those larger leagues if you're looking for an option. Now, for the Giants, last week I sat Saquon Barkley, and I'm sure probably not too many people listened to it and played him anyway, and I understand that. Like I said, it's really based on what you have to choose from, but he went out and had his second straight single-digit game. It's really his lack of passing work, right? Something that he really relied a lot on last year. They really counted on him a lot in the passing game. He only saw 3 targets last week, but this is a much better matchup for him going up against the Packers. Right now, they allow just about 23 fantasy points per game, which is 4th most in the NFL. I believe this is the week that Saquon Barkley finds the end zone again. He is not a slam dunk must start like he used to be. However, I do like the matchup. I like the opportunity, and I'm looking for him to get in the end zone this week. I'll start Saquon Barkley here in Week 13. Eagles and Dolphins up now, and Kalen Ballage is basically the equivalent right now to every kid out there nowadays that gets participation ribbons. Why do I mean that? The guy's out there averaging 1.9 yards per carry, one of the worst averages in NFL history, and the coach is still calling him the starting running back. I just don't get it. The guy is absolutely horrible. Why not move to Gaskin or Laird and give one of these young guys an opportunity just to see what they have with these guys? Regardless, though, we're not starting any of these guys going up against the Philadelphia Eagles run defense. Not worth the risk, especially here this week. Now, for Philadelphia, I kind of just want to pull my hair out. I mean, if I had hair, I would want to really pull it out. I mean, does Jordan Howard return this week? I mean, last week, Miles Sanders doubled up Jay Ajayi in volume. Ajayi was there sporadically but didn't do anything to really impress. this is a matchup that you really want to play somebody in, though. I mean, they're going up against the Miami Dolphins, who give up over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 5th most in the NFL. Right now, in my opinion, Miles Sanders is the safest option in this backfield until we hear more about Jordan Howard. If Jordan Howard sits, could this be a little bit of a revenge game? And maybe Jay Ajayi gets a little bit of added volume to kind of rub it into his former team. That is a possibility. Right now, for me, it's only Miles Sanders, but we're watching the practice reports here remainder of the week. If Jordan Howard is a full go by week's end, he's definitely a name that I would put back over into the start column. Just need to wait and see how healthy this guy really is. Rams and Cardinals up next, and I know we kind of want to start whoever the starting running back's going to be for the Arizona Cardinals, but who is it going to be at this point? David Johnson? I mean, there's a chance that Chase Edmonds comes back this week. We already know about Kenyon Drake, who's produced solid here, before their bye week. I mean, no one is really safe, though. It should be Kenyon Drake, in my opinion. He's the best option in this backfield. Now, right now, the Rams have all been Thanos snapped out of the playoffs. I mean, they're not, technically eliminated yet, but they don't look like anything like a playoff team or anything like they did last year whatsoever. Right now, though, the Cardinals are just playing for momentum. They know they're not going to win the division either, but they're trying to build off this momentum and take it into 2020. Now, all these guys, like I said, they're all risks. If I had to take a stab at one of them, it would be Kenyon Drake as a low-end running back 2 flex play at best. There is a lot of risk here. David Johnson doesn't look healthy, but we haven't seen him since he, had the bye week. Chase Edmonds, how close to 100% is he? He's put up huge numbers at the time. There's a lot of risk here with this backfield this week. Now, going forward, if they can kind of solidify the touches in this backfield this week, this may be something going forward that could be a solid fantasy viable option in the playoffs, but we kind of need to wait and see and find out what's going on here, if at all possible. Now, for the Rams, this offense is basically broken, right? I mean, what is going on with the Rams? Last week, Todd Gurley had 9 total touches. 9. That's it. Just 9. Arizona allows, on average, right around 20 fantasy points per game, but I mean, does Todd Gurley kind of get a little bit more rest now, maybe? They know they're somewhat out of things. Their playoff chances are basically slim to none, even though they're not eliminated as of yet. Do we see more Malcolm Brown this week to kind of just keep Gurley healthy, not risk a serious injury at this point, knowing that they're really not playing for a whole lot? A lot of risk here. However, Todd Gurley is somebody that I don't know if you can really afford to bench at this point. He's probably going to get the majority of the goal line carries. I have to think they involve him a little bit more, but there's a lot of risk here also. If you have better options, I would consider it. However, at this stage in the game, I don't know if you really do. Hopefully, Todd Gurley is your running back 2, maybe even your running back 3 at this point. If you lucked out with somebody, through a trade or waivers throughout the season, then you go ahead and you play him with confidence. But there's risk there this week, but more than likely, he's still going to remain right here in the start column. Chargers and Broncos up next, and man, is it really hard to not love Melvin Gordon once again this week. And I say that because Anthony Lynn's still calling the plays for the Los Angeles Chargers. In fact, since Anthony Lynn took over those play calling duties 4 weeks ago, Melvin Gordon is running back 4 in that span and half point PPR, but it's not like Austin Eckler is just being abandoned. In that same time frame, he's running back 11. We know Anthony Lynn on a weekly basis is going to involve both of his starting running backs, especially with the way Phil Rivers is playing, right? I mean, he basically looks like an old washed-up Eli Manning at this point, and Denver only allows 17 fantasy points per game, but just last week, Devin Singletary and Frank Gore, they combined for 179 total yards. Their upsides may be somewhat limited, but both more than safe to start here, in my opinion, in Week 13. For Denver, though, I mean, Royce Freeman has all but vanished, and Phillip Lindsay has struggled as of late, but he's had a couple tough back-to-back matchup going up against the Buffalo Bills, the Minnesota Vikings, but now he gets the Chargers, who are a lot easier. The Chargers give up over 21 fantasy points per game. That's 8th most in the NFL. He's only 113 total yards away from having 1,000 total yards on the season. He's an underrated running back still, and he's a safer start, in my opinion, as a low-end running back 2 flex play here for Week 13 once again. Raiders and Chiefs up now, and apparently Oakland just decided to say piss on it in Week 12. Guess they wanted another bye week or something because they did not show up last week. against the New York Jets, where Josh Jacobs only had 10 carries for 34 yards, was basically game scripted out of that game. It got out of control really quick. But Kansas City, they allow some of the highest points to opposing running backs at 25.1 fantasy points per game. So look for a rebound game, a lot better game here for Josh Jacobs. He's back in the start column here once again. For Kansas City, though, it's kind of a wait and see. I mean, look at the screen. There's injury icons all over the place. I mean, who plays this week? Who's limited? We know Damian Williams has rib issues. Shady LaShawn McCoy dealing with a head injury that he dealt with before the bye week. What do we do with Tyreek Hill? Does Tyreek Hill play in this game? I mean, who is actually active? Who's limited? Who is starting? Because whoever that may be, we want them in our lineup here this week. Oakland allows 19.3 fantasy points per game, 11th most in the NFL. Now, going into the weekend as of right now, if Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy are healthy, I'll roll the dice on Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy as a flex play at best. And there is risk involved with that, but it's a decent matchup. So make sure you're watching those practice reports, the injury reports. If they're limited at all, I'm not risking it because the last thing you want is to have them in your lineup, go a couple series and realize they can't go. So look for those full practice participations by the end of the week. If one of them sits, then all of a sudden, Darrell Williams becomes a possibility because at least we know he's healthy. So make sure you're watching those practice reports. We'll kind of have to come back to this game just to see where we need to go once we get a little bit closer to the weekend. Patriots and Texans up next, and the crappy weather last week in New England really limited the upside of one James White. They were forced to keep the ball on the ground a lot more, but that was the first game all year that James White did not have at least 8 fantasy points and half PPR scoring. But we know Houston is vulnerable to pass-catching running backs, and there's a chance that the Patriots will be without Mohamed Sanu and Philip Dorsett again. I will still start James White, especially in full PPR leagues. Now, Sony Michel looked good at times last week, right? Kind of looked like 2019 Sony Michel here and there. He had 20 carries, averaged 4 yards a carry, and he really ran hard. And Houston allows 19 fantasy points per game, but Sony Michel hasn't seen double-digit fantasy scoring since week 7. Not exactly the model of safety or consistency right there. A little bit too touchdown dependent for me. I'll start James White in a PPR league, but I'm going to sit Sony Michel. Now, on the Houston side of things, I mean, is Carlos Hyde underrated? Am I the only one that kind of thinks that? I mean, he's not going to go out there and be a running back 1. We know that, but he's a solid running back 2. Right now, he's currently running back 21 overall, and he's on the verge of having a 1,000-yard season. He's averaging 16 carries a week, and Duke Johnson is not really taking anything from him on the ground. Yes, also you can say that Carlos Hyde really isn't getting anything through the air. That's mostly Duke Johnson also, but Carlos Hyde still has that burst. We saw it at times on film last week. He is capable of having that solid fantasy day and the safer floor. Is the ceiling out of this world for Carlos Hyde? No. Not so much. However, the safety, the running back 2 reliability, the low-end running back 2 high-end flex all day long there still for Carlos Hyde because we know, if anything, the New England Patriots are vulnerable on the ground a lot more than they are through the air. Vikings and Seahawks up now. Welcome back from your bye week, Dalvin Cook. You should never have to take a bye week, by the way. We should petition for that or something because this dude, he needs to be in a lineup every single week. Doesn't matter who he plays, he starts. But what do we do with Seattle? And a lot of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt, and it depends on your situation. So, once again, don't overly focus on what column they're in. It depends on your options. But the fumbling issues, they're back for Chris Carson. And this is going to create havoc for this backfield heading into the fantasy playoffs. It sounds like we could be looking at close to a 50-50 split in this backfield just due to the fumbling issues, once again, of Chris Carson. Rashad Penny had a few big plays last week and really opened this door for him. There's a lot of draft capital invested in Rashad Penny with a late first-round pick, but it's a tough matchup. Right now, the Vikings, they only allow 14.6 fantasy points per game, but they're coming off their bye week in which they had a whole extra week just to game plan for this game. Neither one of these guys are must-starts. Neither one of them are must-sits. There is just a lot of risk between these running backs. If this is something that you're struggling with or dealing with on your team, put a comment down below in the comment section. Hopefully there's a few of us that can get into a conversation and really try to nail these things down because nobody outside of Seattle really knows what kind of touches these guys are going to see. And this just may not be one of those risks that we talked about earlier going into week 13 with fantasy playoff implications on the line. All right, so those are my starts and sits here, week 13 fantasy football. Hopefully that helped make some of your decisions for you. Now, a lot of you guys may be kind of looking around and saying, man, I got a lot of starts. Who am I supposed to start? Maybe everybody's a sit. Who do I pick? Don't worry. We're going to try to get our rankings videos out early this week with the games coming up on Thanksgiving. Latest possible would be Thursday morning before the games start. Going to do my best to get them out as quick as we possibly can. But like always, we greatly appreciate your support. Leave a comment down below on what you think. Maybe you disagree. That's okay. We're not always supposed to agree, because if we did, nobody would want to watch the show. This debate, this going back and forth, it's what makes all of us better fantasy football players, and it's one of the funnest parts of the game. So definitely looking forward to hearing from you guys. Hopefully you have a great Thanksgiving, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.